Well, if Donna and Thelma will sit down and then the riffraff will sit down, we'll get started. And the worst offender is not you. It is good to see everybody here this afternoon. We appreciate everyone coming to support the seminar that we're having with Brother Mike Houts on creation evolution. He's going to have some good lessons. He sent the PowerPoint to me beforehand, so I've already read all the slides, so I already know what's going to happen. But it is great to have you with us. It's great to have Brother Houts with us and his son Matthew. They had a good, safe trip, and we appreciate that. And like I told him, I'm just going to do a brief introduction. Brother Mike Houts from Alabama. And then we're going to have a prayer, and we'll get started. So let's pray. Our Holy Father in heaven, we're thankful for this beautiful day that you've blessed us with. We're thankful for the safe travels of the brothers Houts. We ask thy blessings upon them as they continue to travel. Father, we're thankful for the evidences that you've given us, not only in your word, but also in your creation, that evolution is false and that creation is true. Father, we're thankful for all the many blessings that you give us in this life. As we look around and we see the beauty of it, especially during this time of year, the flowers blooming, the trees turning green. Father, we're thankful for Christ, though most of all, who was willing to die for us. Father, we ask thee to be with those who may be continuing to come, that they'll be able to get here safely. And we end this prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
Well, good afternoon, and I'd also like to thank everyone for coming today. This is to me, this is a perfect-sized audience because we can keep it interactive and still get through a lot of material. And to me, again, it's a very important subject, and really appreciate you spending your Saturday afternoon here. When I say it's a really important subject, I think a good verse to start out with would be John 3:12. It says, "If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things?" And the point is a lot of times, especially today, especially in our society, people that want to sow seeds of doubt with the Bible, in other words, people that are trying to lead other people astray, they'll really attack the Bible on the physical things. And of course, that's evolution is a popular way for that attack. And there might be others we can talk about. But it's really, if they can get people to stop believing the Bible in any one area, to cause them to start doubting the Bible in any one area, it's really like almost analogous to a gateway drug, where that person, once they start doubting in one area, it's easier for them to doubt in other areas and other areas and other areas. And so it is an area that is very important for Christians to be comfortable discussing, to be familiar with, because if a person doesn't believe the Bible when it talks about some subjects, and why would they believe verses like Mark 16:16? He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. Because again, they wouldn't have the foundation needed to believe what a lot of us would consider the even more important parts of the Bible. 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23. "For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. To the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker of it with you." And so another point, if we're talking to people, we're out evangelizing, and of course the goal is you want to get the person studying the Bible as soon as possible and have an open mind, study the Bible objectively. And so we might be thinking, boy, I really want to get to that, get them into the Bible as quickly as possible, and that's what we should be doing. But a lot of times they might want to be talking about something over here or talking about something over here, or they might have some baggage. So we need to be prepared to really, again, become all things to all men. If you want to talk science, then we'll talk a little bit of science. Especially, again, how it relates back to the Bible, how we can tie it in, again, to get them into studying the Word. 1 Peter 3:14 through 15. But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. And do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. And so another reason Christians should care about science is, again, it's an area where Christianity is attacked. It's an area where the Bible is attacked. And true science is completely on our side. And that's one of the things, if we don't remind ourselves of that every now and then, you start believing a lot of the, I guess you'd say the media or some of the atheistic groups out there. But boy, when you step back and think about it, I mean, in every single point, true science is on the Christian side. And that's, of course, what we'll be doing, talking about this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon as well. And so, but we do need, again, to be ready to give a defense to everyone that asks us for a reason of the hope that is in us. And so, because it's amazing, I know a lot of you have been through that too. It's amazing what questions people might have or what questions they might ask that to us are pretty straightforward to defend. And then you almost wonder, well, how could they still have that question? Or why would they have that question? But again, it is very important that we be prepared. 1 Corinthians 10, 12 through 13. There is going to be a temptation to believe human wisdom over God's wisdom. It says, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. And so, we need to not get overconfident either, and again realize that if it's important also for us to stay familiar in these topics, so that we don't start to have our faith become weaker or start to just have doubts in certain areas. And so that's one of the things I always do. I say at these seminars, it's the start of the seminar, and I think, but we're just going to have as much time as we need. Usually, do end up running out of time. But the other one is never want to end a seminar and have someone leave that, boy, I wish we talked about that, or he didn't answer my one question, concerning in this particular area. We didn't discuss it. Please don't let that happen. We'll try to take at least a 10-minute break every hour. And so, if there's something that it doesn't look like we're getting to, or that we didn't cover in quite enough detail, and please, just catch me during your break, or ask questions, right in the middle of the talk. And so, because again, it's there's no reason for anyone to have any doubts in any area. But it's that's easy to say. But I think we've all gone through. Someone might ask a question or might hear something. We're like, oh yeah, what is the best response to that, or how would be a way to deal with that? So again, want to make sure that we cover all those areas throughout the seminar today and tomorrow afternoon. And of course, 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. And so a lot of times, when we will have friends or relatives that we will think are just completely grounded, and sometimes they'll go out in the world and they'll struggle. Because if they're out in the world, if they don't connect with a good congregation, if they're out at college and there's not a good congregation near that college, or if they don't have something like a Christian student center, they can, as strong as we think they might be, unfortunately, I think a lot of us know people that have gotten themselves into that situation. They've really struggled. Sometimes people have even left the church. And so, again, we need to be prepared for that also. And so, really, the bottom line is, we do all get to choose where we put our faith. And if we, just kind of go with the flow, we're going to tend to do what society around us tells us to do. And that's, again, it's very popular now to try to say that, well, maybe science somehow has disproven the Bible, or maybe science is against the Bible, which is, again, completely not true. But we need to make sure we're making a conscious decision about where we are putting our faith. Matthew 7:13 through 14. Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. And when we're making that decision, I think another important point is to always stay focused on eternity. Because a lot of people will make decisions in life really just based on their physical life, their life here on earth. I think one way I like to think about it, though, is if I was to live to be 100 years old, people would read my obituary, and the first thing they'd probably see that 100, a lot of people, and they say, wow, that was a really long life. That's 100 years, that's great. But 100 years is zero compared to eternity. And so when we talk about where do we put our faith, we need to stay focused on eternity. It doesn't make sense to focus on anything else. And so that's another, I think, important point that we need to make, need to be thinking about as we go through this, because that becomes important when we won't get too much into topics like pain and suffering and other topics during this seminar, but it is important. You'll see in some of the examples how society's kind of false teaching in this particular area is really leading us to make some very poor decisions, and a lot of those are based on really the focus on the physical and not on the spiritual. Matthew 16:26, for what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul, or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? So I want to start out, I guess the first technical statement in the Bible is Genesis 1:1. It says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And we're talking about where we're going to put our faith, and there's really two choices. I think Carl Sagan expressed the alternative view very well. He said the cosmos is all that is or was or ever will be. So I have two fundamental choices. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, or Carl Sagan, the cosmos is all that is or was or ever will be. So I want to ask a question. Has anybody ever been asked the question, if God made the universe, who made God? Hear that one? Yeah, I think a lot of us, probably even when we were really young, we might have asked that same question. It's actually, it can be a good question. A lot of times, it's just, it can be a good question. And so it's addressed in the first verse of the Bible. Because Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So in the beginning, not only did God create the heavens and the earth, that means God also created time. And so the question we'd have to ask ourselves, if God created time, well, he has to be outside of time. Right? I couldn't create something if I was inside of it. So by God creating time, which is in the beginning, he has to be outside the dimension of time to have been able to create it. So the question is, can anything outside the dimension of time have a beginning? Right? It can't. Right? Because the word beginning only makes sense inside of time. I mean, it's kind of a strange one. We'll have a few of these where you talk about these are good discussions to have over pizza. You just kind of philosophizing a little bit, but it's actually an important point. We know from the Bible, because God created time, he's outside of time. Therefore, by definition, God cannot have a beginning. He cannot have an end. Any of the words like that we use, they're only within time. So from the first verse, the Bible is very consistent, and it also answers that question about, again, if God created the heavens and the earth, who created God? By definition, God could not have been made. By definition, God could not have been created, because that would have required him to have a beginning. Since he's outside of time, he cannot have a beginning. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Okay, we'll hit a few. Yeah.
So where would you categorize like angels, demons, the devil, with that kind of thing? Like if everything that's limited to time is something that's created, we would argue, I would suppose, that they're created beings.
Right. So they would be, created beings. Once time was created, then they'd be inside of time. So yeah. And so it's, and again, that's it's an excellent question, excellent discussion. One thing when to me, it's always important to get someone, try to, get them looking at the plan of salvation. Really focus on their particular need, which a lot of times when we're doing these kind of studies, that's important. So a lot of these things we'll be going through, they can, you could probably do multi-day discussions on any of the topics, and those can be good, but just a lot of what we'll say is don't be careful if the person starts to run with it too far. You want to kind of get them back. So it's because a lot of these are the next one I think is probably what's interesting, Carl Sagan, he spent his whole career trying to make the universe eternal, and he couldn't figure out a way to make that work. Now we'll talk about later in the seminar, they've come up with theories called multiverses and other discussions, and it's almost humorous where those theories lead a person. When they start believing it, but they're still struggling with that because they have to appeal to something outside the universe, which of course makes it supernatural. because it's outside of nature, so by definition supernatural. So if a person rejects the Bible, they cannot. There is no way for them not to have some kind of false god that they're invoking. Now they use very technical terms, but they'll still be basically a false god that they're having to invoke. They're having to invoke things that are supernatural. Also, we'll talk about that. I think either tonight or tomorrow afternoon. Now, so this is the other one that's a great pizza conversation, and to me this is a really good one for really anybody, but especially young people. Hebrews 9:27 says it is, and as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment. Whereas if you go out to really any of the atheistic websites, I went out to godatheism.com and had this quote, and it says, when the body dies, the brain ceases to function. At that moment, all of your thoughts, feelings, memories, and emotions cease to exist. As we do not believe in a soul, we do not believe that any of these things survive beyond the moment of death. So, all right, there you go. That's really bleak, if you read that last quote. But that's not the main point to make from that particular quote, in contrast with the Bible. Again, we're talking about how we all get to choose where we put our faith. But what I want everybody to do right now is just raise one of your hands. This kind of a trust thing. You're trusting me that I'm not going to call on you because you raise your hand. It's student reflex. You just raise one of your hands. Okay. So now the question is did you have a choice which hand you raised? Okay. So most of you nod yes. Okay. So how did you have a choice? I mean, how could you choose which hand you raised? Okay. Well, the point is if the atheists were right, if you didn't have a spirit or a soul, you could not have made that choice. And the reason you couldn't is what they're saying is you are a chemical reaction. And they talk about, basically that's why everything goes away, because you're just a sophisticated chemical reaction. You're just purely material. This is the atheistic view. And a chemical reaction cannot make decisions. Has anybody ever gone to a bonfire? Just have a bonfire. Okay, so you throw the log on the fire, and it turns out that log burning in the fire, it's actually a very sophisticated chemical reaction. It depends on the temperature of the wood, the composition of the gas surrounding the wood, the velocity of the gas going by the wood. There's all kinds of factors. You can't. There's no computer program today where I could, predict how that log is going to function. In other words, how that log's going to when I put that log on the fire, how it's going to burn. I think I'm getting a hint that I'm moving around quite a bit.
Just make sure you heard good.
Okay, is that everybody still kind of here? Great. I can hear myself fine, just so you'll know. But either way, so if you want to ruin a bonfire for somebody, when you're sitting there watching the fire, you start talking about this. You say, well, that log burning, you just think it's pretty, but it's actually this really sophisticated chemical reaction. It depends on, again, temperature of the air, temperature of the wood, the texture of the wood, the velocity of the air, the composition of the air, all these things that it depends on. The question is, does that log have a choice where it's going to burn? Yeah, it's got no choice where it's going. It's a very sophisticated chemical reaction, but it does not have free will. If the atheists were right, that's all we would be. We would just be a very sophisticated chemical reaction. And they'll say, oh, no, but we're really sophisticated. Well, it doesn't matter how sophisticated we are. If God had not given us a spirit, we could not have free will. And so what's ironic to me is there are societies out there. For example, there'll be like a free thinker society, and it's basically an atheistic society. But, if they were right, they couldn't think freely, because they would just be a chemical reaction. So they'd have no ability to think. In other words, they would just be a very, very sophisticated chemical reaction is what they consider themselves. And so I have an article out on the table, and we're going to leave the articles in the books here at the congregation that goes into a lot more detail on that. In the next few slides, I'm going to give some quotes from a conference the atheists actually had on this. It was about coming up on 4 years ago now. But that's another one. Is that clear to everybody? I mean, please ask questions. I always say I'm not going to do it, and then I do it. When you say, is that clear to everybody, then everybody's like, oh, I guess it's supposed to be clear to me. If it's, any other way that we should look at that? Or because it's airtight. There's no way out of it. If we are just a chemical reaction, we can't have free will. Now, you'll get some response, oh, yeah, but that doesn't take into account, quantum fluctuations. Well, okay, that's nice. So So my thoughts are just these random quantum fluctuations. That's still not free will. So it's so if God had not given us a spirit, we could not have free will. Now, to me, the reason that's useful, and that's another thing I should mention. Seminars like this, please want to make this as useful as possible. And when I say useful, it's so that when you go out and you're evangelizing and talking with friends and neighbors and coworkers, some information here is actually something you can actually use. So to me, this is actually a potentially very useful one because it makes a person realize that if they're saying they're an agnostic or they're saying that they're atheist or however they're phrasing it, that they're missing some really key components. Because again, it's this one. Most people agree they have free will. Yeah.
So are you saying that the soul controls the chemical reactions in our brains?
So I know that only God can give us free will. Exactly how God gives us free will, I don't know. That's another one. To me, when I like to calibrate myself, I go back to the God's in eternity. So God's outside the dimension of time, and so I start thinking, okay, what's going to be like what's going to be like outside the dimension of time? Well, I can't even figure out how I'm going to talk because I at least try to put one word after another. After doesn't make sense outside the dimension of time, and so I quickly realized that there's going to be some things about God that I can't understand, and so that's one. All I can say for sure that I cannot have free will if I was just a chemical reaction, and so that means God had given me a spirit. Now, how God, it gives me that free will. I don't even. I try really hard not to even speculate. Because I wouldn't.
One other thing is, how could we have if we're just chemical reactions and our thoughts are just chemical reactions? How would we have conceived of something like God, or something like a spirit or soul, or even concept of free will?
Oh yeah, and when they, when the evolutionists try to respond to that, it's just creative writing. It's like a poor Hollywood movie. Like a really poor Hollywood movie. But they'll make something of. We talk about that a lot more when we do the discussion on the age of the Earth. But I do like the Star Wars movies. I'll fess up. I work for NASA. I don't know if that's a requirement, but most of us do like the Star Wars movies. And they all start out with a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Well, I love that starting because that basically tells me that, okay, it was a long time ago and there's a galaxy far, far away, so don't worry about all that physics and engineering and, just enjoy the movie, and so that's really what it's saying. And so it's kind of the same thing, they'll just set it up so you can imagine, creative writing, they'll come up with, some way that, well, maybe people did this and this and this. That's, you get on things like, why did basically every major culture, talks about a flood. You think about it, every major ancient culture talks about a global flood. Most of them give a lot of detail, and they were all cultures that, from a secular standpoint, they say they didn't communicate with each other. And of course, we know that people obviously communicated with each other before they were scattered at the Tower of Babel. But they, and it's amazing how creative they get about. Well, maybe people just have this natural fear of water. So it's, they're not really good stories, but they'll come up with stories. Yeah.
Basically, what it comes down to, if we were just a chemical reaction, we'd be like a can of gasoline and throwing fire into it.
Yeah.
The gasoline has no chance to do anything but explode or burn.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
We would be in the same position if we did not have a soul and could not think.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. I've only had. I've had two people tell me they didn't think they had free will, and I think one of them was just tired of talking about spiritual matters, and then the other one, I think he actually believed it because within a year he'd lost his job, he'd gotten a divorce. I think he'd declared bankruptcy. Because you think of just how crazy that thought is. Because, but that it makes sense that that's where it leads. Because if you really thought that, well, I don't have any free will anyway, and I'm kind of thinking I want to do this, so I'm going to do it. You can see where that would lead. Really fast. So I'll give a couple quotes. This was a workshop, and didn't bring copies of this article. I'd be happy to email it to anybody that's interested. And this was about 4 years ago, and the article was in the Weekly Standard. It was kind of a secular magazine, but it was the Interdisciplinary Workshop, Moving Naturalism Forward, and This was a quote, "You, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Who you are is nothing but a pack of neurons." And so you think, well, boy, that's just some crazy person out there saying that. That's Francis Crick. He's co-discoverer of DNA. And so there's some very smart people that will start buying into this. Now, again, I don't think he really believes that on a personal level. I don't think he could really believe that. But from I'm trying to be an atheist, and so what am I allowed to say on this subject? And that's kind of what he has to come out and say. The goes on, says, "This view is the naturalism that the workshoppers and the Berkshires are trying to move forward. Naturalism is also called materialism, the view that only matter exists, or reductionism, the view that all life from tables to daydreams is ultimately reducible to pure physics, or determinism, the view that every phenomenon, including our own actions, is determined by a pre-existing cause, which was itself determined by another cause, and so on, back to the Big Bang." And so again, this is the thinking. If someone believes in the Big Bang, then if we'd had a large enough computer at the time of the Big Bang, they could have predicted, or good enough computer, that we would be sitting in this room today, having this exact same discussion. I would be, using this exact laptop, that we could have predicted that because everything would be, determined. And again, that's if without God, that's where things lead. And then this is one of my favorite quotes because it's really ironic when you think about it. It says, "Daniel Dennett took a different view. While it is true that materialism tells us a human being is nothing more than a moist robot, a phrase Dennett took from a Dilbert comic, we run a risk when we let this cat or robot out of the bag if we repeatedly tell folks that their sense of free will or belief in objective morality is essentially an illusion. Such knowledge has the potential to undermine civilization itself," Dennett believes. And so if I'm just a chemical reaction, it really doesn't matter what he tells me, right? And so why is he worried about telling me I'm just a moist robot, I can't control anything? And so just the fact that they're having this big workshop, because they're up here and they're trying to figure out how to, keep us little people under control, they're having this big workshop on the subject. Well, they should realize that their own philosophy would say it doesn't matter what they do, because we're just a bunch of chemical reactions. And then it actually goes on. It says some of the things they'll some of the ways they'll try to phrase this conclusion to kind of soften it or somehow make us not really realize what they're actually telling us. Okay, so any more thoughts or comments on that? Again, really appreciate the interaction. It makes it more interesting for me, and I know it makes it more interesting for you guys. So that's good. Okay. All right, we'll move on then. You can learn a lot from the Old Testament. And of course, the Bible tells us that in Romans 15:4. And so I think sometimes Old Testament, we learn from it. And to me, it's also, in some ways, it can be comforting to realize that, we're not the first generation that's going through whatever we're going through. That most of these things have been going on since really near the beginning of time. This is out of 1 Kings 18. So this is, 3,000 years ago. It says, "Then it happened when Ahab saw Elijah that Ahab said to him, 'Is that you, O troubler of Israel?' And he answered, 'I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, and that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and have followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table.' So Ahab sent for all the children of Israel and gathered the prophets together on Mount Carmel. And Elijah came to all the people and said, 'How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him.' But the people answered him not a word." And so I'd like to start out, 1 Kings 17. It says, "Then it happened when Ahab saw Elijah that Ahab said to him, 'Is that you, O troubler of Israel?'" So, everybody remember, was Ahab a good king or a bad king? Bad, right? So he's a bad king. So it's really interesting. So you have this bad king calling a prophet of God a troubler of Israel. And what's ironic, so that's 3,000 years ago. We see the same thing happening today. I think this was Bill Nye, the science guy. And he's been getting a lot of press lately because he's been making some really, I don't know how else you'd phrase them, just morally bad statements. I think he has a new show. It might be on Netflix or something. And so, but even before then, he's always been a very staunch humanist. And a lot of people didn't know it. They'll let their kids watch his little videos and things. And most of his videos, they don't even touch on religion. But he's always been a very staunch atheist, very staunch humanist. He won the 2010 Humanist of the Year award from the American Humanist Association. But this is one of his quotes. He says, "Denial of evolution is unique to the United States." And what's interesting, all of this is incorrect. I'll read the whole quote, but he says, "Then people still move to the United States, and that's largely because of the intellectual capital we have, the general understanding of science. We have a portion of that population that doesn't believe in that, holds everybody back, really. Evolution is a fundamental idea in all of life science." One of my, related to this, if you do overseas mission trips, and I'm blessed to get to talk a lot overseas, and that's one of the questions they actually get is, and these are at college, these are at their public universities, and they will ask, why does the United States push evolution so hard? And they really can't figure it out. I was at the major technical university. This was down in Huancayo, Peru, a few years ago, and I had the discussion. And so after the talk, and get introduced, and they say, well, this is such, he's the head of the bioengineering department. And so you think, well, the head of the bioengineering department. So where's he going to be coming from? But it's all through an interpreter. And so he starts out and he says, well, I just had one criticism of your talk. And so I'm like, okay, what's criticism? And he goes, you weren't harsh enough. And then he goes on, he says, evolution is worse than a Disney fairy tale. And again, this is actually a very significant department, because in that province of Peru, they have jungle, they have mountains. They are actually doing a lot of bioengineering, trying to just figure out how to grow enough crops, food for their people. So it's a very sophisticated department. And but that's kind of typical. And so then he just went on, and the translator couldn't keep up. He was just giving me 50 other reasons that evolution made no sense. But it was just interesting. So just that first, the peer pressure of that first talk, denial of evolution is unique to the United States. That's not true at all. I don't think people move to the United States for intellectual capital. I think they move here because of the opportunities in this country. And at least, and hopefully the fact that we do have a lot of freedoms, that we still have. And so, but it, just kind of goes on and on. But it's, again, it's just kind of interesting that, Christians will be being called more and more, the troubler of society, as we, as unfortunately as things move on. I think a really, good quote that I'll talk a little bit about later is just how, again, there's going to be a tendency if people are going to start calling good evil and evil good. And, we're starting to see that already. 1 Kings 18:17 through 21. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. And so, wow, hundreds of prophets. And who was Jezebel a good queen or a bad queen? Okay, so she's bad. Yeah, she's really bad. And so she probably wasn't just letting anybody eat at her table. These are going to be the most important people in their society. A lot of us don't get to eat at the White House every week. Don't feel bad. So these people are eating at Jezebel's table. They're the most important people in their society, and they were promoting worship of Baal and Asherah, and that's 3,000 years ago. Well, today, again, many of the most important people in the institution in the United States promote evolution, and so you see the comparison. 3,000 years ago, very important people, very important institutions are promoting this false religion. And now, today, very important people, very important institutions are also promoting a false religion. In that case, it was Baal and Asherah, and today, of course, it's kind of evolution or humanism or atheism, whatever we want to use to discuss that term. But you go back to it, so they're smart enough to get themselves in a position where they can eat at Jezebel's table. So they have to be sharp people, and they're very important. But you go over to Isaiah 44:15 through 20. And just ask ourselves. Would it make sense to go out in the woods and find a log, and you cut the log in two, and half of it you use to cook dinner over and kind of warm yourself, and the other half you cower into an idol, and worship it, pretend it's it's going to deliver you. Does that anybody have neighbors that do that? Anybody? It's probably not. You think, well, that's just makes no sense whatsoever. Who could, you think, well, who could possibly do that? Well, think of what we're doing today, and ask yourself which one makes more sense. Today, everything we know about just how sophisticated life is, how sophisticated the universe is, well, does it make sense to pretend the universe could create itself and that life could spontaneously arise from non-living chemicals? Of course not. I mean, you could really have a debate which makes less sense. I mean, and of course, neither one of them makes sense. I think one way I like to look, if you're talking about life, a lot of times it goes back to sometimes people will start to go down a particular, I don't want to call it a rabbit trail, but they'll go off on a tangent. But we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars, smartest PhDs, incredibly sophisticated laboratories, and no one's come close to making life from non-living material. I mean, not even close. But we're teaching our kids as fact that it just happened randomly. And you think of just the absurdity of that, and just how much, when a false religion takes over a society, the absurdity of cutting a log in two, and cooking dinner over one half and worshiping the other half. I mean, that's pretty absurd. But just think about how absurd it is. If I was to teach if I went into a science class and I used the same laptop to give a presentation, and someone said, "Oh, yeah, where'd you get the laptop?" And I said, "Well, remember that big storm we had last night? And there's some lightning, thunder, wind. It really stirred up the woods behind the house. And these things were just, they just popped up all over the place. I mean, I hope I'd get tossed out. It'd make no sense. But that would be much more credible than someone pretending life could just make itself, because we can make laptops. We can't make life. And so you got to really, I don't want to spend too much time on any topic, but this to me is when we got to really let sink in just how much we've allowed ourselves to get used to. Because people will literally, with a straight face, tell us that evolution is science. And everything we know about science goes against it. But we've heard it so many times that it doesn't shock us. It doesn't. It should shock us worse than me saying that this laptop just made itself. But it doesn't. Somehow we're just. I don't know how we've just somehow gotten. I don't know how else to phrase it. We've just gotten used to hearing it. Again, no matter how little sense it actually makes. And so now what they're trying to say is, well, maybe in 20 or 30 years we'll figure out a way to make life, and they act like that would prove evolution. Well, NASA, we made space shuttles. So does that prove that space shuttles make themselves? In other words, this question has been long since answered. There's just, we know, going back to Louis Pasteur, we know life can't make itself. But again, just think about how you would broach the subject with somebody. I like the one of just saying, okay, if it could happen randomly, then by the time our children are in second grade, they should have gone to the back of the classroom, cleared out a little space on the counter, and whipped up some life, right? Because things that happen randomly are usually that simple. And so, just keep it at that level, not this person's researching this or this person's researching that. Just say, we have not been able to do this. Okay, so any questions or comments on that? Any thoughts on how you'd present it, or would everybody feel comfortable on that topic? Sort of comfortable, a little comfortable? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I'll keep moving on. Now, this is actually the situation that I think we're really in now. And this was 1 Kings 18, 17 through 21. It says, "And Elijah came to all the people and said, 'How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him.' But the people answered him not a word." And so you think of all the evidence that God had given to Elijah. He'd given him tremendous evidence. He'd given to the Jews. So he'd given tremendous evidence to the Israelites. But they're not willing to take a stand. And you put yourselves in their position. They know about God. He'd given them tremendous evidence. But they're in this society that say, no, don't believe in God. Believe in Baal and Asherah. And so they're not, basically what the quote says is they're not willing to answer a word. So they're confused. And so this was again, from about 4 years ago, Pew Research Center analysis says 33%. They asked people, questions related to origins. 33% say humans and other living things exist in their present form since the beginning of time. 24% of supreme being guided the evolution of living things for the purpose of creating humans and other life in the form it exists today. 32% evolution is due to natural processes such as natural selection. 7% don't know. 92% believe in God. And so what you really see from these surveys is people are just all over the map. But they're not really committing to anything. And it really depends on how you ask the question. Because if those 92% really believe in God, then wow. Just think of the questions. When we believe in God, then why did God create me? What's my purpose here on earth? You have all of these, just really, it should be a very life-changing belief. But for most people, it's not. They'll just say, "Oh yeah, I believe in God," and then they just kind of move on. And so that's you look at other polls. This was one. The choice was humans evolved with God guiding. That's actually dropping, which is good because it's kind of an insidious, non-biblical viewpoint, I guess you'd say, or philosophy. It says 44% God created humans in present form, and that's up to 46% now, and then 15% was humans evolved, but God had no part in the process. And so it's only from that poll, it's only about 15% that are really kind of the diehard atheists, which is also interesting because they kind of totally dominate our public education, dominate our society. That's really only about 15% that, if you looked at it, would be considered a real diehard atheist. But anyway, I think that's to me, that's the situation we really find ourselves in now when you're out evangelizing and studying with people. That's what you'll probably run into the most, is that people just, they haven't really thought about it. They're not really willing to make a stand. They're not really dug in one direction or another. And so, again, think about ways to, use any of what we're, anything you do to get them to start studying the Bible, seriously consider getting into the Word, and really learning God's plan for their life. And of course, straightforward reading, the Bible does give God's plan of salvation. In Mark 16:16, he who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. And then, of course, another important technique is to just immediately go into all of the examples in the Bible about people being saved. I think a lot of you know I grew up outside the church, and when I first started doubting evolution, I had absolutely no idea what that meant. I just knew that evolution didn't work, but I didn't know really where to go from there. And boy, if you just turn on the radio and you listen to sermons, a lot of times the sermons are okay, but boy, you get to the end, and it's just a unlimited number of things you're supposed to do to become a Christian. And it's science engineering. So first time I heard, they call it like the sinner's prayer or something. I was like, oh, okay. And then I'm listening the next day, and it's a whole different prayer, and it really bugged me. I mean, because it's not. And so a lot of times it's this. You'll have people out there that'll realize that atheism doesn't work. They really starting to know there is a God. They'll realize that evolution doesn't work, but they really don't know where to go. And so that's why it is so important to get them into the Word. And so just giving them examples of people being saved. My wife and I, we went through a lot of different denominations, and what actually happened, we finally visited the church. We asked, we had our standard question, well, what do you guys believe? We were just, because we were on denomination number 12 or something. That was our view of it. And they said, well, it doesn't matter what we think, it's what the Bible says. And that had a huge impact on us. I don't even know how to describe, because absolutely no one had ever said that to us. And so another point, again, try to make when some of these will try to go through a lot of things. Maybe during one of the breaks, sometime I can try to talk about the things that made me start doubting evolution. It was a huge combination. And so you'll always, I just would say, always, I don't want to call it a shotgun approach, but always, you'll never know what's going to actually get a person thinking. But as soon as possible, again, let them know that it's not, this isn't a matter of opinion. We're looking at what does the Bible say. And you go into, book of Acts or, throughout the Gospels, it's really clear, what we do to become a Christian. It's very, hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized, remain faithful isn't something that someone just came up with. It's a very good summary of what the Bible says to become a Christian. And so that's something that, again, we want to when someone is deciding they don't want to be an atheist, really important to let them know how to become a Christian, because we'll also talk about later, they can go all kinds of different directions. Because when someone gives up on atheism, they're just, they're just going to probably latch, they run the risk of just latching on to some other philosophy that's also wrong, because they were deceived by atheism and they don't really necessarily know where to go from there. So I think go ahead and take a break there. Maybe take about I guess we could do about a 10-minute break, and then the next set's going to be a little longer. So we'll so maybe if we start up with about 5 minutes till 4. But any other questions or comments on what we went through just last few minutes? Or the way I like to phrase it, did any of that make any sense? Good. I got a nod back there. I like that. So because it's so. I think the key, in summary, all the questions, the standard questions, are answerable. If we did the one, if God made the universe, who made God? That's it's just by definition, God created time. He has to be outside of time. Anything outside of time could not have had a beginning. And so that's the free will one. Just think about that more, but that's one that'll get a lot of people thinking. And again, you cannot have free will unless God gave us a spirit, and that's just airtight. Because if God didn't give us a spirit, we are just a chemical reaction. And so then saying life could just make itself is got to be the least credible statement anyone could ever make with a straight face. I mean, I don't know how else to phrase it. I mean, it's so much worse than me saying this laptop made itself, or anything made itself, because we cannot make life. But just think about it. We are teaching each other, as fact, that life just made itself. And it's just, it's kind of nonsensical. And then also, we're not the first followers of God that have ever been in this situation. And so I use the example out of 1 Kings. And so, and because I had a relative, and that was her big stumbling block. She hadn't gone to college, really smart, but hadn't gone to college. And how do all these important people believe this if it's wrong? It's a huge stumbling block. And she was baptized about 5 years ago, so it was very good outcome. But it was the old, how could all these important people believe evolution if it's not true? And so that's just think how you'd answer that question. A lot of people will be thinking that. You're telling me this, and it's all making sense to me, but all these important people, believe, evolution. So how could they be wrong? So think about how you'd respond. But to me, a good one is, again, going back to Scripture, 1 Kings 18. There were some really, really important people telling you to go out in the woods, find a log, cut it in two, cook dinner over half, and carve the other half into an idol, and bow down and worship it. And so it's so really important people can have really wrong beliefs, and so that's true 3,000 years ago, and it's true now. But anyway, let's take, I've got us down to about an 8-minute break, and then we'll come back here and I'll keep going.